Namaste, I'm Diksha Yadav, your host for What This Means, a Swarajya podcast show. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Shamika Ravi. She is a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. And in this episode, with her, we'll be discussing major three topics: Bihar economy, female labor force participation, and girls' education, and little bit about ease of doing business and compliance burden and the corruption issue. I really hope you enjoy watching this episode. If you do follow, rate the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're watching or listening it. Thank you. Namaste, Shamika ji. Thank you so much for speaking with Swarajya on what this means. First, I want to start with how was your Chhath Puja? In Delhi, especially this time, we saw Delhi government took special interest in making the celebration grand even here. So, where do you usually observe Chhath Puja? Is it Delhi? And how was it?
I observe it wherever I am. I like to go and join the celebrations. I myself have never had the fortune, but I do hope to observe it, do the 3-day fast and the rituals sometime in the future. But my mother does, and my sister has been doing it for 2 years. And the good thing is that this year I noticed I've been getting videos from across the world, different countries. Even in Delhi, we did drive around to see the different ghats. It has never happened at this scale.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, it indicates that people from Bihar are there. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're observing something that they feel so strongly about. Right?
Yeah.
The second is, this is what electoral democracy is meant to get us. Because governments have to respond to the preferences of people.
Yeah.
So I was very happy that not just the local administration in Delhi, but in most of our states and big cities, they facilitated by setting up ghats and making areas available and clean water, and that's a very welcome step. It's a democratic resurgence, I think, of Biharis everywhere across the world, and I'm happy for it.
Yes. Particularly because we see Delhi was quite empty. Many had gone back home and everybody wants to be home. But this kind of arrangements at different locations in such a grand, everybody can come together and celebrate was very fascinating to see for us as well. Otherwise, we have seen small group of 2-3 families, they set up something.
Right.
But this time it was grand and everybody preferred going there instead
Right.
of making those groups. So, yeah.
That's true. So, in fact, I'm still carrying some tikua because that is what the season is meant to, bring. It becomes, it's a very appealing, and I do think it will become more popular. Simply because, there is no officiating figure. There is no priest. There is nobody else. It's you and the sun god.
Yeah.
And there are these rituals which have been done for thousands of years. So there is a simplicity and a purity to the entire ritual, which I find quite fascinating, quite attractive.
And the Chhath songs, they took over all our algorithms. So they have become immensely, it
popular.
is going to, I think, people from other regions also are, they are
Started
going to
singing
start.
those geets. How nice.
They were singing, plus I think they'll start celebrating it also.
Right.
Eventually.
Right.
I want to start with Bihar's economy. It is growing. It's not like it's not growing. But people outside Bihar and within Bihar somehow feel neglected, or when they see their neighboring states, specifically like Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh, and which were, they were too referred to as Bimaru states before, and then they see they are growing at much faster pace. And this is despite Bihar getting substantial infrastructure investment. So, I want to start with, how do you see the Bihar's economy journey so far? What do you think about its future? But additional to that, because every state is somewhat unique and it has its own culture, own demography, and also, work ethic, so to speak. So, in that sense, what do you think? What has worked for Bihar and what has not worked, or even what has maybe hindered its growth, if you have to look at the past few decades?
Bihar is a very important part of the heartland. It has a very unique mix if you look at the economy. Because agriculture, compared to, let's say, other states in the neighborhood or even relatively more affluent states, the share of agriculture is, of course, predominant. It's very large. But agriculture-wise, Bihar has actually done very well in terms of diversification. It has one of the highest extents of diversification. But you see, agriculture growth and modernization and all of that doesn't directly lead to higher government revenue, because agriculture is by and large not taxed.
Tax,
Right?
yeah.
So the state, in terms of revenue generation, has limitations. Right? A very large part of Bihar's labor force migrates out. And of course, you can look at the entire spectrum of skill. But people from Bihar, very hardworking. In fact, states are now competing, and particularly after pandemic, we saw lots of private companies, many states vie and run special aircrafts and trains to get people back. So that's the relevance
Yeah.
of good quality, hardworking, disciplined labor.
Yes.
Correct. The question then is, what about back home? That not just in terms of remittances that are sent back,
Yeah.
which is a very large part of the economy. What happens to entrepreneurship and business development within Bihar? And I think that part is where I would say a lot more work needs to be done.
Right.
Because you see, longer term destruction of entrepreneurial capability, which happened in the past regime, particularly under the RJD, it's not easy to wipe out very quickly. Right? Law and order, yes. If you look at crime, particularly crime against women, they brought it back to not just normal, but exceedingly well. If you look at a lot of the social indicators, then Bihar is actually, it is outdoing almost all its neighbors. If you look at infant mortality rate, it's half. It's very, very
Substantial.
so much more improved if you compare it with whether it is UP or any of the neighboring states. If you look at just in terms of what has happened to female labor force participation, right? Traditionally in India, there are some pockets where we have had very low female labor force participation.
Right.
Haryana, Punjab are one of those areas jahan pe, regardless of improvement in economy,
Yeah.
female labor force participation has always been quite low, right? And Bihar has been the other, Bihar, Assam,
Always.
etc. Right?
Yeah.
But Bihar particularly very, very low, the lowest female labor force. What you have noticed in the last 10, 15 years that it has increased almost 4 times. So the biggest improvements, if you look at percentage-wise, has happened in terms of female labor force participation, particularly in rural areas of Bihar, right?
Yeah.
So there are many changes, Diksha, on the ground that I think people are either unaware or they become aware during elections when they go to the ground.
Yeah.
And then they start speaking, and many experts are pleasantly surprised that ye arey aise kaise. But if you observe the data, then you see that development wise they have actually done very well. The nature of the economy and what is leading to the growth and development still lacks industrialization or a serious push for services, etc. Right? But those are matter of it's a matter of time. It needs careful planning and
I was listening to one of your podcasts where you were talking about your study with Himachal and Uttarakhand, and you mentioned about leadership.
Yes.
So, what's your opinion on how much that aspect of, say, lack of growth in terms of state revenue can be attributed to the leadership aspect of various governments in the state?
You know, one thing which I have said in the past, but I think it's important to drive home, the per capita income, the GDP. Of Bihar in 1991 and 2005 are almost identical. But remember, these are the 15 years when the whole country grew.
Yeah.
State after state, you had a major growth spurt, right? That 15 year.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that was the time when Bihar stagnated. In fact, it went down because there was a lot of expropriation.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of not just crime, but actual destruction of capital goods.
Yeah.
So the salvaging of that, so the improvement that they subsequently saw, made sure that, in 15 years, your net gains remain the same. But after 2005, you do see a pickup. Bihar has grown a lot since then. The question then becomes of the nature of the growth itself. That agriculture mein to aap grow kar rahe hain.
Huh.
You are diversifying. In fact, they have done exceedingly well in certain kinds of crops. But
Yeah.
agriculture se state revenue nahi aata hai.
Hmm.
So then you need,
Fortunately.
right? So
Yeah.
you need then industry.
Yeah.
You need services,
Mhm.
right?
In this also, there is a bit of debate when I was reading about it. So unemployment is a pressing issue in Bihar. And while some say that we need industries and everything, others are of the opinion that that's a missed boat. And because now even service sector is
I want to
dominating.
put that down squarely. It's very poor understanding of economics. Any economist, if they tell you that we have missed a bus or a boat, does not understand economics. You see, China grew at a time when global demand for manufacturing was rising and they exported to the world, before them South Korea and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But it's not like the demand for manufactured items have stagnated. All of Asia is growing.
Yes.
Africa is growing. Latin America is growing, which means the demand for manufactured goods will continue to grow, Diksha. The problem is that there are buses and buses coming.
Yeah.
Are you ready to get on to the manufacturing bandwagon?
Right.
And that is what all of Industrial Policy 2.0 is. From a national perspective, we are very clear, yes.
Yeah.
We have done a 180-degree reversal from the past administration by making Make in India and industrialization a necessity today. So whether it is the drive for skilling, whether it is the production-linked incentive, a lot of the financing schemes, right? A lot of infrastructure and inputs, they are geared towards making manufacturing work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So no state in India today can then say we do not want industry. Are?
Then how do you assess this unemployment situation in Bihar, especially with the youth unemployment? And what do you think, at policy level, what steps needs to be taken for addressing this issue, particularly for Bihar?
Bihar and youth unemployment that you spoke about. Number one, youth unemployment is a global phenomenon. People below the age of 30 are not in a rush to join a job. It is not peculiarly Indian or peculiarly a Bihari problem. It's a global problem. That's number one. Number two, in case of Bihar, there is a peculiarity, which is that, of course, a very large number of people are going out because the kind of jobs that they're doing outside, largely industrial jobs.
Yes.
They're working in factory, or they might be working in security and labor, in services, etc. Those jobs are not getting created in Bihar, right? That is one truth. It's a fact. Alternately, Bihar also has a peculiarity that there is an extremely high demand or, a preference for government jobs.
Yeah.
Right? Which means if you look at the data, then we are seeing that people spend 10 years, 15 years taking exams for a government job.
Yes. And
we
even
also
if it is
know
not A grade or something like that.
Government job.
Yeah.
Right? Which means, and we have seen instances where people have quit decent private corporate job
to get
for the sake of a
government job.
Sarkari job.
Yeah.
That itself is a sign of a problem. Right? Because what we are linking it to is not necessarily productivity in those government jobs, but we are linking it to the benefits. We are linking it to lack of opportunities of other kinds. Right? So that kind of fascination, over time, you see, it feeds on the fact then that you're less entrepreneurial in terms of taking risks of a certain type, right? But this is where I say that, it will happen. It's already beginning to happen. But we are still seeing the reminiscence of the time when a very large group of entrepreneurs and businessmen, the business community was driven out.
Yeah.
Right? Out of sheer, politics and, the kind of expropriating policies and politics of the RJD.
Yeah.
And that is what we largely call Jungle Raj.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have to understand what impact it has on business
Mm-hmm.
and business taking, risk taking capabilities, it is not very easy to overturn that overnight. It will take time.
Yeah. Even if we exclude the people going for jobs, say moving to other countries, but about 7.2% of the population in Bihar is still resides in other states,
Yes.
and they and not just big jobs like you mentioned, in labor force, or even small shops. They're setting up small shops of, say, stationery or fruit juice or things like that. Staying away from family for a long part of the year.
Right.
So even that that small business is also why is it that first why Bihar fails to capitalize on its human potential into productivity and growth, and secondly why even this small businesses which can be set up in, say, cities of Bihar, it does not work there and they have to move.
You see, Diksha, it's very important to understand that you need growth and you will see development as an outcome of that, because the state is actively improving quality of life for people. So you are seeing growth in agriculture. You are seeing the government investments into health, infrastructure, irrigation, education, as a result of which Bihar's poverty today is much lower than any of its neighbors.
Yeah.
But the kind of jobs you are talking about requires businesses, right? It means you need to be able to establish businesses. The small businesses that they set up, let's say vending.
Yeah.
The willingness to pay, the market size, none of the cities in Bihar have the same potential if you compare it with, let's say, a Navi Mumbai or several cities in Gujarat or Delhi, right? So large markets lend themselves to greater growth. It's the kind of reason why people migrate from anywhere to anywhere.
Right.
Right? So
So
people
that
migrate for
kind of-
better market opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange that, like, to think of us, like, from Delhi perspective, that they don't have, like, great markets for even small businesses and things like that.
That's true. That's
So-
true. But that's where you see, when we talk about job creation, we also have to talk about job creation outside of the government. If
Yeah.
you just look at the data, your states which are creating or which have very low unemployment or that are creating large number of jobs are states that are growing economically outside of agriculture. Right? So jobs are created by value creators, by businesses, by enterprises, by factories, by services, firms, right?
Yeah.
The establishment of that is that is the next phase we are talking about, that the movement out of agriculture will require for Bihar to put greater focus on entrepreneurship development. I think, we need to work very hard to give a lot of these to set up new factories, to set up new kind of businesses within Bihar. But it requires that initial cost
Yeah.
in terms of who takes the risk. It's not just the money, people. That's why I'm saying the risk takers, etc. Labor, yes, we have very large number. Bihar is also the youngest demographic in the country,
Yes.
right? So it's a young population. And you are seeing that with improved connectivity, of course, many things are happening. But when you compare it with the rest of the country,
Yeah.
then there is a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah. Because really, if you think of it, in almost every state, people of Bihar are moving out for jobs. It's not just Delhi, Mumbai, or, say, Gujarat. To conclude this topic, right now, tourism sector is much in focus. Everybody says that India is not fully, has tapped into its tourism potential. And in that also, Bihar, especially because it's so, heritage and culturally, it's so important for us. So it's not tapped like half of its potential when it comes to tourism sector. Do you think even if just a single prioritized focus on tourism sector can turn things around for Bihar economically?
Just tourism, no. For no country, no state, we can say only tourism will suffice. But tourism is a very large job creating sector.
Yeah.
It creates a lot of value, and globally, despite the global upheavals in terms of wars, etc., you're seeing that the number of tourists, people are traveling more, so that number is increasing. And Bihar obviously has all that history and the potential to be able to do that. Basic connectivity, of course, has improved, but
Yes.
the kind of connectivity we would ideally like for this kind of international tourists or even tourists within India to visit Bodh Gaya, Rajgir, Sitamarhi, northern parts where you have a lot of history as well. I think while they are attracting, if you just see in terms of the number of hotels in the last 10 years, you have seen almost doubling of the number of big chain hotels in each of these cities that I'm talking about. But it's still insufficient. It's landlocked. So there are limitations to the kind of tourism you're going to be able to develop. The movements are all in the right direction, Diksha. But can more be done? Yes, a lot more can be done. Just like I think at the All India level, we should be doing a lot more in tourism.
Coming to female labor force participation, just the data before I ask the question. Of course, between 2004 and 5, it was 45%. And then, but if we talk about the 2017 and 2018, from 23.3% to just last year, 2023 to 2024, it significantly improved to 41.7%. And the global average is 47.2%. So, see, we are seeing this improvement in female labor force participation. Plus, on one hand, we still need, women in leadership roles,
Yes.
whether it's public or private sectors. But on the other hand, there are trade-offs, right? We are seeing total fertility rates fall below replacement levels across, countries, including India. And that comes, of course, with moving for jobs in different cities, living in a nuclear family, and then childcare becoming completely a big challenge for working women living away from parents. So, is there a balanced approach to managing this trade-off? And should government policy intervene in, help find this balance sooner than later?
Yes, because you see, left to the markets alone, and by markets I mean if you just leave things the way they are, the pressure on young women today in India is very high. And I mean high in terms of they're getting more education and number of years of training more than ever before. So the girls are studying a lot, right? They're getting all kinds of skills. But when it comes to entering the labor market, that's when it coincides with the biological clock, which means having kids and so on. I think it's very important to understand that, people or, young couples don't have kids just for their own self-gratification. Children are for families. They are for community. They are for society. There is a social good element to having babies, right? But if that is the case, then how can all the costs of doing that only be borne by women in the house with very little help? Because your traditional family structures are breaking down very rapidly.
Yes.
So the idea that there are grandparents around or you have uncles and aunts who can watch over the children while you go out to work, right, to earn a living and so on. When that traditional institution begins to break, because you are nuclearizing very fast as a family, joint families are almost not there anywhere. You are urbanizing very fast, which means younger couples are also extremely mobile. They're moving from rural to urban areas. From urban areas, they're moving to metropolis and so on and so forth, because that's the nature of the job market.
Yeah.
What happens to the babies? What happens to the children? Children take up a lot of time. Children need time. It's very labor intensive. So left to the market, this is the choice young couples are going to make. This is the choice that women are going to make. Have fewer children, right? Now, from a larger economy and society perspective, a certain balance is warranted. We are a low middle income country. We really need to grow for the next 4 to 5 decades in order to be able to get to a high income status. which means that we will need a working population which can sustain not just little kids who are
Yeah.
dependents, but also in a rapidly expanding older people.
Yes.
We have around 120 million people above the age of 60.
Yeah.
So then who pays? Who works? Someone has to work to take care of the elders and the children.
Yeah.
That's true also at a macro situation, right? So the population shrinking or beginning to decline, this is a bit unanticipated. If you look at all past projections,
Mm-hmm.
state after state in India also, you are seeing that the total fertility is declining much faster than was initially anticipated, which means you have to lower the cost for the women. How would you lower the cost? Well, public policy has a role to play. You have to become family friendly. We should think of taxation at a family level. Couples should be filing together. There should be benefits to having children or to having elders that you are taking care of. We have to think of all kinds of support institutions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Daycare, childcare, elder care, right? We need that much more staff that can support with the nursing, again, for children and elders.
Yes.
So all of that right now is on the shoulders of these young women.
True.
Right? So we need to develop the market to provide labor which can help, which of course you still need to buy.
Yeah.
But that's how markets work, right? But at the same time, Diksha, there is something more fundamental, I think, a conversation that young women need to have and society needs to have. We can't just value people if they go out and earn a living. The work in the household, raising a healthy family, running a financial establishment in the
Yeah.
household, well-run families is also labor-intensive, and it's a big contribution.
Yes.
There's value. In fact, we estimate that the care economy in India is around 17% of the GDP. So there is a lot of value being created.
Yeah.
It's just in the household, so there's no money transacted.
True.
So we discount it. And when we discount it, it's not just as economists in terms of GDP estimates, but you discount it even as a society.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not working, you're in the house. No, they're working a lot.
And it's not changing with our generation.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
all good for the camera, but we see it. We can see that you don't get the respect if you're not earning within family or outside.
Yeah.
So it's a big change that needs to happen.
That
That's
conversation is already started in every household.
Hmm.
We need to have it more openly. This conversation has to be at a society level also. I think we should make it okay for young women to stay back and raise families. That's fine. But at the same time, if you want to work, then having children should not be as painful as it is currently with very minimal support. We will have to provide that kind of a support architecture.
This is the paradox. You need a female in workforce also for your economy to grow, like you just mentioned. One more thing I found very interesting in your study paper that you had put out on female labor force participation is the graph of their working age, right? It's relatively it has relatively fewer working years. Starts with between 20 and 30s, peaks in 30 and 40, and then it's declining
Comes down
after
very fast.
that.
Yes.
After 40, the working age is declining, and this especially caught my attention and found it very interesting because assuming the most stressful years or challenging years for a woman who is, giving birth and also is working would be between late 20s to late 30s. And so I wanted to understand, is there any reasons for that decline happens for post 40? Is it because they're trying to take a break, after those challenging years, or is it that they are
I wish
coming
they
across
could take a break. It's because the
health
kids
issues?
now are at a time when schooling happens and the exams happen and the women are staying back and taking a lot of leave and eventually dropping out because they need to support those kids, right? Not just in terms of having children and rearing children in the initial years is labor intensive. That's correct. And after that, so what we are talking about, Diksha, first of all, I think for the benefit of people who are going to watch this, I do strongly recommend that you read the paper. And that's because these are empirical facts. This is what is happening in the Indian labor market, right? The explanations that we are giving now is a little bit of a conjecture.
Okay.
But because you are noticing this relationship between age and labor force participation. And it is so stark, state after state after state,
Yeah.
rural and urban, that age matters a lot.
Yeah.
Women enter, because they're studying a little more than initial, they are entering around 2025,
Yes.
but they drop out around 40.
Yeah.
That's when the kids are adolescents and they still need help. right?
Yeah.
The men enter around the similar times as the women, but they stay on much longer. Men get at least a decade and a half more on an average of working age.
Yes.
Right? So those are very important. Then marriage matters. Marriage seems to make almost no change to men's labor force, but to women it does. Right?
Yes.
Similarly, children. So I think labor market, first of all, in India should be understood as state labor market, because there are enormous variations state to state. There are cultural aspects, there are job opportunities, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, right?
Yeah.
There is that element to it. And second is female labor force participation or male labor force participation on an average. This is just one number, 49%, 67%. But behind it, there is an entire distribution, which then you begin to look at age-wise. You look at life events like children and marriage and so on, to really then unravel that what is the policy lever that we have then? How do we facilitate higher labor force participation overall in India? That is why the government exam and wasting too many years. That just is such an unproductive way to lead one's life, and it's not good for the economy. But also for the women, we need policy interventions. And that's why I call them larger family-friendly policies. Labor policy should not be thought of in a mechanical way. And that's, I think, is sometimes the pity when we look at things from a macro view. We look at them mechanically as formula.
Yeah.
Nahi. In fact, economics has to be understood much more institutionally.
Yeah.
And then you understand that these are the levers. That yahan pe we can maybe think of a financial instrument.
Yeah.
Here we need to actually invest a lot of money into building the care infrastructure. Right? Elsewhere we need to think of corporate policies.
Right.
And then what is the appropriate policy? What will generate this kind of outcome that we want?
This trend was really interesting to me because I was thinking maybe they faced health issues or they are taking a break. Because if you see most women during childbirth, they take that break of 1 year or off from the job. But once the child is going to the school, I was like, okay, after 40.
Unfortunately, you can't just send them to school and forget about it. They come back from school, they take exams.
Yeah.
And, education is also quite labor intensive for the family.
Coming to the girl education, there was a very fascinating anecdote that you shared in your article in the Hindu on transformation of girls' education about PM Modi's Gujarat rally, where younger women were lesser educated than their mothers-in-law.
Yeah.
So from the Gaikwad era. So why was that, and what caused this decline?
So what happens is that, policies intervene, and at that point, the king basically gave incentives or motivated people to educate girls. And that automatically did translate into girls entering. Like right now, what we are seeing across the country.
Yes.
Right? But that momentum has to be maintained. Of course, today is a different age because there's so much more technology and exposure.
Yes.
So a reversal is unlikely.
Yeah.
Right? But in narrower areas, when you look at it, which is where that anecdote from Gujarat is interesting, you did see a reversal. Right? Where the mother-in-laws were more educated in terms of number of years than the daughters. And hence you realize that, progressive policies also there is a life that you need to sustain. That if you stop prematurely, if you stop that kind of support, then it's not a one-time push which will take them to a higher trajectory. You need to sustain it. Right? Which is where a lot of the push that is happening in terms of, a lot of our amenities. Think of, there is a reason that when we talk about making basic amenities available to all Indians everywhere in the country, toilets, homes, bank accounts, then of course many of them, women are a central focus of that.
Yes.
And that is because what is being attempted right now is not just that let's raise labor productivity by making basic amenities available, water, electricity. It's also trying to transform the society from the grassroots, which is that, women and the kind of, the lack of negotiating power that
Yeah.
women have in many parts of the country, that has already shifted in the last 10, 15 years if you look at the data.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, when we look at individual level poverty, India has nearly entirely eradicated women's poverty because women are getting a lot of the benefits.
Yeah. From
Right.
these
So
schemes. Yeah.
these transformations that are being attempted are not narrow by any. These are transformational, generational changes,
Mhm.
right? And that's the way you should also understand, some of the cases that we pick up from past to understand कि अब करना क्या है,
Yeah.
करना
Yeah. Very interesting to see that decline and reversal. Uh, Even in girls' education part of you with Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao initiative, and it's been 10 years, and we have seen the difference. Female sex ratio has improved, infant mortality rate for girls has decreased, female dropouts from secondary schools have reduced, all these factors. But my question is this how how do you see at the pace we are progressing? Is it like slower or it needs more? And plus, not just in enrollment numbers, but also quality wise, the quality of education that we are providing the girls and the whole schooling experience for them in terms of that. And also the multiplier effect also, which you mention on your in your article, of educating a girl and how it changes society. Are we, I think it's too soon to think of any data right now. It's been 10 years and students are quite young, but are we looking forward to read the data of intergenerational, when what happens with educated girls? And also, are there any emerging data as to what these girls from these beneficiaries of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao are taking up after, say, school? Are they opting for higher studies? What kind of subjects they are taking or career paths they are choosing? Are there any data as of now?
There is sufficient data in the last 50 years to support that educated mothers have healthier children. Educated mothers have more educated children. So there are many outcomes in the family at the household level, which is directly linked with the education level of the mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's also similar for nutritional outcomes, height and weight and so on.
Yeah.
So we know that educating girls will have impact which are intergenerational. So you should think of these as investments which have long gestation periods, and which is why it is as powerful. And that is why we do it at the level and mission mode that we do. In terms of post-education, what happens? I think, the conversation we just had in terms of the institution of family, institution of marriage and so on, they do have differential impact for men and women, right? But at the same time, Diksha, what is very heartening is that sector after sector, you're seeing more women not just enter the pipeline, but also rise to leadership levels now. There are many sectors, not just the moonshot or the occasional sectors, for instance, when we think of pilots or banking, which have a disproportionately larger number in India at leadership position compared to other countries. Like pilots, India has 15-16% of all our pilots are women.
Yeah.
Globally, this average is 5 or less percent, right? So it's a threefold, it's massive. Similarly, in the banking sector, which has traditionally been a male bastion, in India, we do have a lot of women who are heading banks and so on. So there are several such sectors. In fact, if you remember the moon mission that we had, the ISRO mission, and you saw all those wonderful pictures of women scientists, leading, then we do know that things are changing in, I think, much faster way than it is being documented. To tell you the truth, I think the real economy of India, what is happening on the ground, the changes are much faster than what is being documented and researched. That is why there is an element of surprise. Every time you look at the granular data and you see, wow, this is what has happened. There is also a feedback loop. Women, because we are a democracy, they're voting very differently. Yeah. They want different things. The kind of public utilities, safety,
Yeah.
the kind of things that women are beginning to demand, it is now well documented. We have studied and
Yeah.
sort of
We can see it
researched that.
in approach of different government, and
Yes.
even during elections, they have taken the
Yes.
center stage.
Think of the Women's Reservation Bill, Diksha.
Yeah.
It was tabled in the mid-90s by Deve Gowda
Mm-hmm.
and resoundly rejected. After that, it was tabled multiple times, including by Prime Minister Vajpayee.
Yes.
Rejected each time. So then what happened?
Yeah.
That now we have passed it near universal acceptance.
Yes.
Right? So clearly the ground has shifted.
Yeah.
And the politicians who do have their ears on the ground,
Yes.
they are responding.
Yes. And we will need a lot of women in leadership roles once delimitation happens.
Yes.
So,
Well, the good thing is that unlike most European nations or other democracies, smaller countries,
yeah.
in India, we have a very robust
Yeah.
pipeline of sarpanchas and women on the ground who have
Yeah.
been leading for the last 15, 20 years now.
Yes. They have
So
good
that pipeline is there.
representation. Yeah.
The pipeline is there.
Absolutely. One more article which I found very interesting of yours, and which you wrote about 7 years ago, titled "Your Dreams" or "You Dream of a Culture of Growth in Indian Economy," where you also mention Nobel Prize winner Joel Mokyer's work on fundamental role of culture in the origination of modern economies. Can you briefly explain what does he mean by that? And then I have a follow-up question.
This year's Nobel award, half has, of course, been awarded to Joel Mokyer, one of my favorite economists, because there is a historical perspective to economics that he brings. And it's very important to understand that culture has a very direct and significant impact on nations and the way they grow or not grow. Right? So culture is extremely important. And he compares different kinds of cultures and which cultures are more amenable. What is the relationship of society and mankind, humans, with nature? Societies which are not fearful of challenging nature. The innovation is an outcome of that interaction. So there is a lot of fascinating work he has done. When we think in the Indian context, then we do know that, fundamentally, the Indian economy is one where, because now historically the situations were perhaps very different, which is why you have science and literature and medicine and arts of the extremely high quality. But we had several hundred years of relative decline.
Yeah.
And during that, we have seen that because the economy shrunk and was devastated, we became extremely poor. And because of very low levels of income and high extent of poverty, it leads to risk aversion. That is why I think even the fetish for government jobs and so on comes from a place of insecurity and looking for a greater security for themselves and their families, right? So I think we have to break out of that mold now, which is where it's fascinating that during the COVID crisis, repeatedly I would hear references that globally the expectation was that if hunger deaths are going to happen now, because economy after economy were grinding to a halt, those hunger deaths would happen in India. Everyone was expecting hundreds of millions of people to die. And that didn't happen. Right? That didn't happen. Thank God. But some amount of it has to do with the fact that, we have grown now. We are a low middle income country, rapidly continuing to grow.
Yes.
Year on year, you are seeing not just the global forecasts in terms of projections, but also almost always they're revising them only in one direction, which tells you that not just the Westerners or the larger multilateral institutions, but even us, we are also quite conservative, right? So we like to say, ki, "Acha, itna hi grow karenge," and then everyone's happy when you grow more. That's it's a very natural Indian way, sort of. But it tells you that, we have the means now. We are no longer poor. We have the means to do bigger and greater things. We are now better connected than ever. If you look at the outcomes in any, right, even while we speak about Bihar, which has the lowest per capita income in the country, but just look at the kind of growth.
Yeah.
It does not have the kind of growth that Gujarat or Tamil Nadu might have, so they're not industrializing, but Bihar is growing.
Yes.
There is no pocket of India
That's not growing.
which is not growing.
Yeah.
Right? The relative growth is what we quibble about. Now, all of that means that now we have to think of where is the future growth going to come from.
Yes.
And that is where the cultural change, the shift,
needs.
is important.
Yeah.
And it's towards exactly doing that. There is now very good, compelling research which tells us that new innovation, where does it come from? Right? So there is a risk-taking capability. There are people who are entrepreneurial, who will go out and do new things.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole startup space, by the way, is about. And India does have a very rich ecosystem of startups.
Yes.
And we continue to hope that it does better and better. We want more young people to take risks and do new things. And when I say new things, they're basically finding market solutions for some problem. It could be food delivery. If that is what people want, that is the valuation, so be it. That's where the jobs are.
Yeah.
Right? It's
And
expanding.
it's a market gap.
It's expanding. But I think the focus you are seeing now on research and development from the government, right?
Yeah.
Whether it is the RDI scheme, whether it's through the ANRF, you are seeing lots of money now.
Yeah.
So in terms of resources and thinking coming into government supporting fundamental research, right? Everywhere. That's because the compelling evidence of the last 50 years is telling us that countries where governments have supported basic R&D and then the development happens by private firms.
Yeah.
So private ownership of the patent but supported through government funding is having the biggest impact on productivity gains and growth.
Yes.
Right? Traditionally, we have not had that in India. We have not been known for R&D.
Yeah.
In fact, overall spending on R&D has been very low. And of course, government is more than private, but they're all very little.
It's actually a little similar to Bihar, but in a different job spectrum, like how they are providing and building homes and everything. But back in home, they are not able to do. Similarly, with this innovative, you mentioned that India traditionally exhibits quote-unquote general morality, which fosters innovation, yeah? Yet we see significant number of people go abroad and do all the innovation, but they're not doing that back at home. So what specific, cultural, institutional or institutional misalignments do you think that is preventing us to, enter that space or create that culture? One that you mentioned now is the RDI and the government support that will help. But the same people, they were going out and innovating. So that's very innate, right? Innovation to us.
No, you see, just like the economy, people also, your labor market and the outcome that you had in terms of brain drain, these are all outcomes of socialist policies.
Okay.
Right? So we brought in extremely restrictive and over-regulated, highly criminal. I mean, small business offenses are criminal offense, and that's the great effort right now in trying to decriminalize. So the kind of policies that India brought in the first 50 years, which then you have been lately trying to dismantle in order to spur growth.
Yeah.
Through labor, through other, all kinds of other reforms, economic reforms. It's true for overall labor as well. That, we have a system where we set up fantastic institutions like the IITs and the IIM, the Indian Institute of Science. We have the AIIMS, medical
and everyone
institutions
move
everywhere.
Abroad.
But they were too few. Number one, their growth internally. Very few of those institutions grew organically. These are all outcomes of the same. The belief that research did not, it needed some amount of basic funding and that's it. R&D par utna dhyan tha hi nahi. Now, the setting up of those institutions itself is wonderful for an economy like ours that we did.
Yeah.
But it needed to keep pace with economic growth overall, which is only happening now.
Yeah.
Right? So, when you say that brain drain has happened, largely because all those smart people, even when we trained them, Diksha, वो काम कहाँ करते? आपका overall economy was so over-regulated and socialistically just binding them down.
Not innovation friendly
No,
or
not
business
business
friendly.
friendly.
Yeah.
And again, there is a cultural aspect of that which we need to. So, what we are doing in terms of decriminalizing
Yeah.
or deregulation, there's a massive effort
Yes.
which we have to bring about. But along with that, we also need this cultural change that business means taking risk. Taking risk means possibility of failure.
Failing.
Failing is fine.
Yeah.
So again, that itself and the search for safety and the search has meant we have suffered great loss of skill to the global market. But if you think about it, it has not been an all lose-lose, right? A lot of the reverse brain drain have been the reason why we have had great growth in IT. If you look at the pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
if you look at medical devices and so on, there are lots of sectors where the reverse brain, we want our people who are educated and trained and skilled to also now come back.
Yes.
But they are not going to come back. I mean, people might come back for the love of the land and family and so on. But that is not a sustainable economic model. It will mean that they are able to really extract the value of all their time and effort.
Yeah.
And for that, we will just have to invest more in R&D. We will have to make our not just institutes of research and higher education, etc., much more friendly to innovation and allow failure. But at the same time, the markets have to also evolve. And culturally, we have to be open to and accepting to failures.
Yeah. Shamika ji, throughout this tenure and specifically from last 10, 11 months, we have seen Modi government have been trying to, ease the burden and compliance factor that has been a hurdle and simplify them. What we can see direct, like for us, it's the direct taxes or the GST compliances. But on the other hand, recently there was this new KYV introduced, right? Know Your Vehicle. So, which again becomes one more step. So, what do you think will take for the executive of the day to, not resort to more regulation, as a solution to any question of policy?
That's a very good question, Diksha, because one thing you assume is that as the economy becomes more dynamic, the nature of regulation stays the same. No, that's not true. The regulation will also have to evolve. In fact, today we need much larger government capacity simply because the nature of the beast itself has transformed. It's changed. Right? So sector after sector, we need much more government capacity.
Yeah.
To be able to regulate and oversee and support a lot of these sectors. So that's number one. And government capacity, just like the rest of the economy, suffers from lack of high skill. It's the same case in the government. Government is part of the economy and the society.
Yeah.
Right? So today, almost all your surveys that you are doing, industry surveys, people tell you that financing is no longer the biggest constraint for us. It is not finding skilled manpower.
Yeah.
Government is no different.
That's something.
So the kind of rules, therefore, that do get written, require correction. Right? And you're seeing that, right?
Yeah.
But the hope is that we do it quickly.
Yes.
And in the least cost way.
Yeah.
And I think digitization, greater dependence on data, there's an element of objectivity.
Yeah.
And of course, I think people are also getting trained. There is an upgradation that is happening.
Lastly, Shamika ji, January this year, you came up with a paper on the working hours in India. So where does India stand in terms of average, time spent on the economic activity when compared to similar economies and also the larger economies?
The richer guys, the richer economies don't work that much. And that has to do with the fact that, they do have a lot of surplus. They need to work lesser to sustain a very high quality of life. India, as an emerging economy and as a middle income economy, we are actually comparable to other economies. So in terms of number of hours worked, we are similar to China or Vietnam, etc. Right?
Okay.
We do work hard, much more than the richer nations, but that is expected. No country has grown without working hard. At their stage of this development that we are witnessing,
Yeah.
people put in a lot of hours, right?
Right.
So the interesting thing in India is, unlike China, and again, larger cross-country studies, particularly comparisons to China, are quite insightful.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because, per capita income in China is, of course, almost 4.5 times India's, almost 5 times.
Yeah.
But if you look at the private consumption part of it,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not that much more. It's only 1.5 times more. Which means people in China are just marginally better than people in India
India, yeah.
in terms of consumption level.
Mm-hmm.
The state there is getting a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the difference. Democracies get you what, right? So relative to our growth, the consumption level, and therefore if you equate it with quality of life, is actually in India is not that much different from China.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Of course, the capacity of the state in terms of finances and how much resources available, yes, the Chinese state today has a lot more money. So therefore, the working hard question, we have to put it in a perspective, and people need to be informed. We need to look at these kind of insights very seriously, that bina kaam kiye, Sarkar cannot do more than what it does in terms of amenities. Uske baad to mehnat se hai.
So, as per that data, which sector in India do you think need to increase their working hours for their own benefit and efficiency?
When you look at the sectors, the services guys are working the most, right? Manufacturing is relatively less. Agriculture mein sabse kam hai. But agriculture is still very much the kind of agriculture, if you just look at cultivation, etc., is still very much sunlight and weather dependent.
Yeah.
But as the economy progresses and there is greater focus on processing, which is what now, diversification is not just in terms of crops. The next stage of agricultural growth also comes from more processing.
Yeah.
Right? Where you are then dissociating with nature to some extent, right? Because then it becomes large factory units where you work for 9 to 9 or whatever, 9 to 5. You will see that agriculture sector will increase. All right. I think the bigger difference, Diksha, in India is not so much sectoral variations.
Okay.
For us, the bigger concern is state-wise variation.
Okay.
It's like the northeastern states, on an average, are working 2.5-3 hours less per day. अब ऐसे कैसे चल सकता है? Right? You cannot have states where you are working 5 hours a day, 4 hours a day, and expect the kind of economic growth. You are seeing that your fastest growing states are also working the maximum hours. Right. So growth is not a mystery. It's an outcome of hard effort, a lot of hard work, and a lot of discipline.
So the general assumption that we all see, and we keep throwing on social media and all, that government employees work less and private sector employees have to work a lot, that also gets validated from your research results, where it was shown that the the government employees almost works 1 hour or so less than the private employees, and also the difference between the rural and the urban government employees, where rural government employees further work 1 hour less or 1.5 hour less than the urban.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But it also helps you understand why there is such preference for government jobs. One is, of course, we talked about the safety and security part of it. But the other is that, government job means many different things, right? So that comparison, which is government versus the corporate sector, is an important one, because people only compare salaries to say that, well, they have to keep up and so on.
Yeah.
But, you have many grades within government. And it is a well-known truth that in the government sector, at the lower rung, if you look at employees, they're actually paid much more compared to the private sector. And as you get towards the top, then there is a sort of senior officers would, of course, insist they get paid much lesser. I haven't looked at the number. But the difference between public and private is quite severe at the grade 4, 5.
Yes.
Okay. So in many of our states, we have instances where government teachers, for instance, are getting paid 4 times private teachers. Right? Now, what justifies these kind of salaries? I mean, eventually in economics, you think of salary as it should be equal to the marginal productivity, no?
Yeah.
What is it that you bring to the table in terms of
Yes.
the enterprise? That's not how these jobs have been designed. Because if you look at the benefits in terms of, let's say, leisure time, a day has 24 hours.
Yes.
So working hours to हमने देख लिए कि by government employees are working fewer hours.
Yeah.
What about leisure time? So leisure time also, government employees on an average have an hour and a half, 2 hours more leisure per day, right? And that indicates the quality of life. So then salary by itself is not the only comparison you should look at.
Yeah.
You see package.
More holidays.
More of many things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what do you want as a person? As an Indian, my quality of life means I should earn a certain minimum amount of this much. I should have health.
Yeah.
Insurance. My children should have access to schooling.
Yeah.
I should be able to travel a certain amount.
Yeah.
And
housing and other
pensions
benefits.
and housing.
Yeah.
Right? So I think this kind of data is interesting because it brings a certain objectivity to the overall discussion we have around wages, around compensation. What should be the benefits? And very importantly, I think, Disha, we are at a stage where we need more government. The rate at which we are expanding economically, becoming much more complex economy, we need more government employees. But more police, more nurses, right? What kind of government employees is the question.
Yeah.
We also have acute shortage when it comes to even A-grade officers, right? We do have vacancies at all levels.
Yes.
We have one of the shortest diplomatic corps globally, right?
Yeah.
So government capacity means we have to keep up with what the need is.
Yeah.
And the need, of course, is becoming larger and more complex. But this data helps you also understand how to incentivize. Whom should we attract in government jobs?
Yes.
And I think in India, government jobs should attract the most motivated, the smartest people, as it is supposed to, right?
Absolutely.
Private sector allows for a lot of risk taking, but there is failure.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental difference between the two. So those debates and those discussions should be founded on data. Not on passion alone.
Yeah. So, lastly, on the corruption issue, we see that, culture shapes, say, institutions and it provides legitimacy. And with corruption trends, or whatever we see and read, it's mostly huge at local, like bottom level, than, say, at the top level, right? So, is the top-bottom reform like sufficient, or do we need a parallel bottom-up cultural transformation, when it comes to the corruption issue?
First of all, these are open empirical questions, right? What has happened to the nature of corruption? Where is it there? Where is it more? Where is it less? But one thing we must understand, that economic growth requires your public servants or your officials also to be entrepreneurial, right? Otherwise, it's a compliance based.
Yeah.
You see, growth requires for officers also to be, quick on their feet and make decisions.
Yeah.
And not just checklist.
Yes.
Right? So you are changing, like growth requires a cultural shift. Not just overall when we talk about the private sector, but also within the government.
Yeah.
That we need. And that's what, a lot of research coming out of China is helping us understand. That how is such a large country, how did it transform? They have, the corruption levels are quite high at all levels. And yet, growth gets incentivized at all levels, right? Officer at the highest to the lowest level is incentivized to grow the economy and the local economy. Right? And so that is where I think in India, the best thing that has come out in the last 10, 12 years is the competitive federal structure. States are now competing. Which means things that they should have been doing long back, which is becoming investor friendly and business friendly. They're doing now under duress or doing under competition. That is the power of competition.
Yes.
So those are good things. Overall, it is not true that India is any more or less corrupt if
Yeah,
you
that,
compare it with other
yeah.
emerging markets. In fact, there is so much data now available to suggest
Hmm.
that you can't conclusively, these are highly hypothetical questions which are asked
Hmm.
of people, that is this a corrupt country? Are
No,
you? And
yeah,
people
that's
tend to
fair.
have,
But corruption, of course, is there all over like in every country and everything. But at local level, that we see, with say in exams, cash for exams or things like that, that kind of thing can be, worked on, right?
No, definitely. But what you have seen, Diksha, in the last decade or so is greater digitization,
Hmm.
greater scrutiny
Hmm.
has also meant that many things are now happening and happening more efficiently on time,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And exams also being one. In fact, the some of the discomfort we have had in terms of
Yeah.
rescheduling parts of the exam and so on and so forth are also because we are trying to adapt those systems to the newer demands,
Hmm.
right? We are trying to make common entrance. So you're also trying to take a lot of the pressure off the children,
Hmm.
right? I mean, if we started talking about exams, we want to make it level playing field. Therefore, NEET, like new education policy, allows you to experiment.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we don't become the rat race with the tunnel of
Yes.
just catching the fastest runners and then
Yeah.
making them engineers or doctors. No, new education policy is meant to foster new kinds of institutions also, including exams.
Hmm.
But digitization and greater scrutiny has meant that, even if you look at e-seva, you look at passport seva, you look
Yeah.
at
Passport
FIR,
saver has been hands down.
right? But think of now filing FIR. The new rules, the new laws are meant, and they are making the system more efficient so that the cost on the citizen
Hmm.
is minimal.
Yeah. So, lastly, to end this, then there will be many female students who want to or would be looking to get into the policy aspect of it. So, any message for them or how they can navigate? We can end on that.
And the women, I think we need a lot of well trained and we need motivated, passionate people in policy, right? And policy making. I think we need, Diksha, a lot of people who have interest in research, who can then inform policy. And policy making is not just happening within the government. A lot of it is influenced by writings and research and objective
Yeah.
trends, etc. We might be able to draw from data. I highly recommend
Yeah.
younger people to read more research, know what are the big questions, what are the big issues that the country is grappling with, right? Country is very large in India. I would also recommend that pick your states of interest, pick your sectors of interest, and not just make yourself aware, but also try and contribute by writing, by disseminating, because policy making, government is one part of it.
Yeah.
A lot of times, ideas also have to be socialized.
Yes.
People have to be ready. People have to be primed, like bureaucrats have to be primed. So the nature of policy making is far more complex than writing of rules
And
and
takes time.
regulations. It takes time.
Rigorous.
It
Yeah.
takes time.
And one book, if you have to suggest on economics that everyone must read, what would you say that would be?
I would say Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell.
Okay.
I would strongly recommend start simple, start basic, start with your principles.
Yeah.
And I think more and more people, not just students, anyone with interest in economics, should read these preliminary texts,
Yeah.
because economics is not obvious.
Yeah.
There is a lot of counterintuitive
Hmm.
nature of thinking. Growth is not just happening at an all India macro. Growth happens in households, in firms, when individuals make decisions. So how do all these things come together?
Yeah.
And I would also say read now Joel
Yeah.
Mukher. I really think more people should read economic history.
Yeah.
And in the Indian case, I think, read up the 5-year plans to understand how far we have come from the kind of thinking
Yeah.
that we started out with. You appreciate things more now.
Yeah. Because someone who has to start in economics, they are always confused with different perspective. People take different factors and counter the same thing, and then you have to be smart enough to navigate those things. And basics are really
Also,
important.
beyond theory. You see,
Yeah.
there is theory, and that is the appeal. I think as a student, you discuss a lot of theory, but then the data tells you the real extent of things.
Yes. Yeah.
So those empirical reality checks,
Yeah.
I think, Disha, are very important. A large country like ours cannot be run theoretically,
Yeah.
right? We need a lot of evidence.
Absolutely. On that note, thank you so much, Shamika ji, for joining us, speaking with us. It was lovely talking with you.
Likewise.
Thank you.